Hey, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our very different sort of webinar. We have a great panel representing a lot of very, very important projects for the future of Industry 5.0. I'm Peter Tostill from Workplace Innovation Europe and also a partner in the Bridges 5.0 project. I've been working on these projects for I don't know, even 30 odd years. Terrifying thought. But I think in the past, it was very common for projects like this to be working like ours to be working very much in silos. We didn't really know or have much contact with other projects that were going on. And in some cases, I think there was actually quite a lot of competition between them. So, a degree of secrecy. But that era has now gone. I think all of the projects now, which certainly the ones represented here, are working towards a common purpose. We're all focused on developing Industry 5.0, both as a concept, but also very much looking at what it looks like in practice and supporting its development in practice. We're all focused on embedding it in policy thinking, and particularly in the minds of people who are influencing how companies develop. We're keen to demonstrate opportunities and challenges to workers, to learners, and to other stakeholders. And I think we have a really exciting task in front of us. So sharing what we know, working together as a common, if you like, sort of mega consortium, I think is going to be very much part of that. And that's something which I know that all of the projects have talked about quite recently. So we've got a number of themes. If you've been onto the lab, on Fresh Thinking Labs, then you'll have seen them. And that's our starting point for what will be a very, very conversational session. We want to focus on how coherent the concept is and how the concept of Industry 5.0 has actually developed over the past 3 or 4 years. We want to look at how we actually build that bridge between Industry 5.0, which often seems to many people as a very abstract concept. What does it look like actually in practice? We want to look at the role of technologies and AI in supporting human centricity and the other aspects of Industry 5.0. How we introduce it within companies, the skills that are emerging as being essential to the development of Industry 5.0, as well as the kind of the organizational culture and so on. And there'll be other issues as well which come up. We want to make this a very conversational session. So no PowerPoint, no presentations. Everybody, I think, has had a chance on the platform to read a little bit about each of the projects. If you haven't, well, it's still there. So I'm not going to ask presenters to give long explanations about what each project is doing, and they're absolutely banned from talking about individual work packages, which are really guaranteed to bore people to death. So sorry for that. The success of this session, in my view at least, would be me having to do very little in the absence of a true conversation. Not for any laziness on my part, but more because I want all of the panel and you, the audience as well, to have full ownership of what's actually going to go on in the next couple of hours. Put your questions in the chat, and if there's an opportunity when that issue is being discussed, I will bring it into the conversation. And then at the end, we'll create a more open forum where you can raise your hands and be part of the conversation as well. So let's get started. First of all, I would like our panel to introduce themselves. Just say one sentence about the project and what it's achieved so far. Okay, maybe 2 sentences, but short ones. So let me start with Sergio from AI REDGIO. Sergio.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. Sergio Cusmeroli from Politecnico di Milano. I'm coordinating the AI REDGIO 5.0, which is the main focus of AI REDGIO. It is a Made in Europe project, and so it belongs to the Manufacturing Association, Factories of the Future Research Association, and we have a strong focus on SMEs. We conducted 27 experiments with SMEs regarding AI at the edge and Industry 5.0.
That's very succinct. Stephen, Bridges 5.0.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Coordinator of the Bridges 5.0 project, as you can see on my screen. Happy to be here. Happy to be with so many known and really interesting persons on the screen. The Bridges 5.0 project was created at the moment that Industry 5.0 was launched. We had finished a project called Beyond 4.0, which meant there was something after 4.0, which is, of course, 5.0. And our project was constructed to have this bridge towards Industry 5.0. And one of the core ideas of Bridges 5.0 is that you can start with a lot of things, but you really have to start at the company level. So what are companies that are Industry 5.0? What does it make a company Industry 5.0? And how does that translate to what workers do? So what are the workforce skills needed to work in such a context? And that's what we try to do in this project. Understand company level and worker level.
Thank you, Stephen. And Roland, also from Bridges.
Thank you. We have a specific part in the Bridges project, and that is we will come up with suggestions on how to enable transformation in the company setting. And this is one of the deliverables that we will publish this year. And we had a lot of preparatory workshops with companies, with trade unions and others.
Thank you. And Giga from Prospects 5.0.
Yes, good morning, Giga Valic. I am the EU Affairs Manager at SEISMEC, which is, as the name says, Flemish Research and Technology Organization, so based in Belgium. I am the coordinator of Prospects 5.0 project. I am representing the project today together with my colleague Simona, which I will give the floor to introduce herself in a couple of seconds. And we at Prospects, in one sentence, have the actually difficult, let's say, exercise of coming up with a framework and a set of KPIs actually that measure the deployment of let's say, Industry 5.0 paradigm at different companies, so different in sizes and in different sectors. So I will stop here and explain a little bit more later on, and I'm happy to see a couple of colleagues from the project here. Besides Simona, I see Pavel Miroslav from University of Bohemia, and also one of the use cases, Asgard. So I'm very much looking forward to our discussion, and I give the floor to Simona.
Thank you, Giga. So, well, I'm working within the Prospects project for an SAP project. Our main role is focused, on the, that's a hard work, engage stakeholders that we are addressing through Prospects. That is a project that's trying to ground the concept of human centricity, resilience, and sustainability in order to provide tools to the market and to business organizations and to the companies. But as Giga said, then during our discussions, we'll go in depth into the solutions we are working on.
But how do you pronounce that? SKILLABILITY.
Sorry?
Brent? I was just introducing Brendan, whose microphone is off.
There you go. Can you hear me okay? Nice,
Yes.
nice to join you, Brendan Sullivan from Politecnico di Milano. coordinating the Skillability project along with Monica Rossi, who's unable to be here this morning. But a little bit about Skillability. Skillability is a project kicked off about a little over a year ago now, primarily focusing on identifying, developing new pathways for, we can say, essentially susceptible persons, specifically within the project focusing on hearing impaired, but also to the broader realm of individuals within the workforce. So understanding how new technologies can be used through a more human-centric and socio-technical manner to help facilitate inclusion within the workforce.
Thank you, Brendan. And Monica, I can't see your colleague Monica on the...
No, she's unfortunately unable to join us this morning.
Oh, okay. So I'd like to introduce Diane from SEISMEC.
Oh, thank you, Peter. I'm Diane Confurius. I'm a senior researcher at the Dutch Organization of Applied Science. And so I'm working on SEISMEC, and what we are doing in SEISMEC is quite interesting because we're trying to place a human in front of the technical development. What that means when we're implementing new technology, there are some tension that arise. And within SEISMEC, we try to see how human centricity can empower the workers. So we put the workers in front of the technology, and to do that, we are different pilots, about 17 pilots across 14 countries, and so that is SEISMEC. And we hope that at the end of this project, we will come with some tools to show the industry how we can empower people when implementing new technologies.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Siobhan O'Neill and I am a researcher in the Insight Centre in University College Cork here in Ireland. As Peter said, I'm a part of the SEISMEC project as well. And just to, I suppose, add on to what Diane was saying there, one of the core features of the SEISMEC project is to include the workers in the co-design and co-development of the technologies to, I suppose, ensure that empowerment and that they have their voice in developing those future workplace technologies.
Joel?
Peter, your sound is not right.
Yes, it's breaking up a little bit.
Okay, it must be the internet because I can't.
No, it's okay.
See anything? Okay, I'll just try and speak louder. That's okay. Chris Ivory.
Hi, yeah, good morning everyone, and yeah, very excited to get started with this discussion, but very briefly on UPSKILL. I'm the PI for UPSKILL. Originally the project was kind of customer driven by manufacturing firms looking at how we could help them digitalize, etc. And then we shifted our focus about sort of halfway through onto Industry 5.0. So what we found is interesting from our perspective. We are sort of ethnographers, primarily sociologists of technology and organization. So we have particular perspectives on that. So we became interested talking about Industry 5.0 as a concept. You know, is it a kind of melancholy and anxiety about what's coming in the future of technology? So we had big discussions around that. And we try to understand, you know, the conditions under which Industry 5.0 might actually occur within organizations. So rather than seeing it as a paradigm shift or a sort of policy initiative, we try to see it as a practice phenomena, sort of responsible management, good management, that sort of thing. And then to ask the questions, well, okay, under what conditions do we find more of it in a firm rather than less? Under what conditions do we just not find it at all? So that's the sort of ways we've been approaching asking these questions. We've been working in manufacturing all the way from a very large car manufacturer all the way down to artisanal firms in Italy. doing year-long ethnography. So very detailed sort of ethnographic notes that we've been collecting and reflecting on. And looking forward to discussing that today. I've also got my colleague Chris Land with me as my my second on this. I don't know if he's actually managed to make it in or not.
Chris Land, you're very welcome if you're here.
He's usually running between one meeting and another, so
I think we all know the feeling. So if he joins us,
I'll chase him on.
Okay. The first thing I think then, thank you very much, and I think everybody can see what an experienced and valuable panel that we've got today. I'd just like to throw a question open, which is very much what have we learned about the concept of Industry 5.0 from these projects? As Stephen said, I think 4 years ago when the Bridges project started, it was very sketchy, the whole concept, what it actually meant, and there were more questions perhaps than answers. So how far have we come, and what have your projects actually taught you, or what insights have you gained about the nature of Industry 5.0 in that time? Who'd like to start?
Yeah, I can start. We didn't start with a precise definition of Industry 5.0 in our research. We tried to define a set of practices, I think, which reflect a bit the ideas that Chris just insisted on. And there are different approaches, because I know Giga has a very, very nice approach with KPIs and all those kind of things. But I think that at the end, we will understand that it will be hard to define, but easy to recognize. So when we see a company where people are engaged and doing things, we understand that's probably Industry 5.0. And other companies where people just leave because they can't really find their place, we will understand that's not Industry 5.0. There's something wrong with that. So what we did in our project was define a set of practices that we want to see. They might be aligned with the KPIs that Giga will be talking about, but it's about these practices. They need to be there. It's like a necessary condition to understand how it goes. So we've done that. We tried to see if that could be identified in millions of vacancies. And the surprising answer is yes, we can find 30 to 60% in countries of companies to a certain degree having Industry 5.0 practices.
Thanks, Tim. Ziga.
Yes, thank you, Peter. I think what we so Prospects now is 2 years into its 3 years duration. So what we learned very quickly from the kickoff was that basically we have 14 use cases. I've pasted the link there so you can explore a little bit. But as I said, we have different sizes of companies from different sectors. And what we learned very quickly is that at the company level, most of them, they don't actually care if we're talking about Industry 4.0 or 5.0 or, it's a transition for them. What's important is that it works. And then, to make progress, because you obviously need to see and evaluate what the state of play is and where you want to go, and you need to measure that. If you don't measure, you're flying blind. So I think that's one thing that we figure out, that they want to have a set of, let's say, a dashboard that they can look at and benchmark. Then again, it's actually the discussion showed that everybody has their own perception of what kind of KPIs should be taken into account. But what came out is I think the human-centric approach. I think that's what makes, let's say, the Industry 5.0 approach interesting for the company, because of different challenges that we are all facing now, or, all of the European countries are facing, the demographic state, the lack of skilled workforce, etc. So yeah, that's the two things that we learned quickly early on in the process. So the human-centric side of the Industry 5.0 is very interesting for the companies, and then that they need to be, that they don't actually care about 4.0 or 5.0 as long as it works for them, and that they need to measure it somehow, but they don't necessarily know how to do it.
Thank you. Roland, what do you think?
Adding to what Stephen has said, because we're in the same project, but also what Shiga has said, I think, and that is one of the learnings for me, Industry 5.0, and particularly human centricity, is in many cases not so easy to grasp for companies. So they need to get a better understanding. And in our project, one of important activities around learning and teaching factories, and that is showcasing how human centricity might look like. And in the project last week, we were visiting one big company, and they introduced a new automation scheme, smart automation. And there's a strong demand on new skills, but also on how to set up a human centricity. In our case, that people are not working at the machine anymore, but in a separate room and surveying a whole production line. And I think these are questions that all the companies, or many companies, have currently. And with a human-centric approach, we can really support them solving problems that they have.
Right. We'll come on to you in a second, Chris, but can I just add can I play devil's advocate for a moment? Because, I mean, the concept of workplace innovation, which Stephen and I and others have been working on since at least the turn of the century, has been around that's been around for a long time. And we know an awful lot about how you create high-performing organizations, which are also very human-centric. What has this new concept of Industry 5.0 added to what we know already? Or is it just simply a rebranding exercise?
Was it a question to me?
Well, you can answer it if you like.
Well, one aspect, I can only mention one aspect. We see that technological development is extremely fast going on. So we have to prepare, and that has consequences on the organizational structures, etc. So we are confronted with additional challenges, and at the same time, an increasing complexity. And I think Industry 5.0 is one of the elements to decrease the complexity in a certain way, or to make it, if you have a red line through your activities, and that would be, for instance, human centricity, that might help companies. So there is of course, a lot of things have already been there for quite some time, but there are new elements, and that are being brought by new technologies, from my perspective.
Sergio, you've had your hand up first.
Okay, so I have two main considerations. Coming from the fact that my project is in EFRA, is made in Europe, so is the European Faculties of the Future Research Association. First of all, there was a very strong skepticism about Industry 5.0 in many manufacturing research environments, EFRA included. 80% of our companies didn't reach Industry 4.0. Why are you talking about Industry 5.0? This was the main objections that I received when I introduced my project into EFRA. So maybe also the message was a bit wrong. The message should be, in my opinion, more on the one side, an evolutionary path from Industry 4.0, and not really a fifth generation of manufacturing industry. And the second, it could be identified with the European way to interpret Industry 4.0. So the European way to interpret Industry 4.0 includes human centricity, but also resilience, and also sustainability and circularity. And this is a must, and this is a competitive advantage of our companies with respect to the global landscape. The second aspect was that if you talk to EFRA, We are doing resilience. So we have 20 projects specialized in resilience of the supply chain. Sustainability and circularity, we have more than 100 projects doing that. And so the key message was, look, we are focusing on human centricity, and then we will demonstrate that if a company is human-centric, then the pathway to resilience and to sustainability could be more effective and more efficient. This is the way we are approaching this, and we are approaching this in a bottom-up way. And so we are running 27 SME projects, also in didactic factories, learning factories, with a strong connection with the European Digital Innovation Hubs.
I think it would be interesting to come back to the question of what Industry 5.0 looks like in practice in those practical interventions. But meanwhile, Chris.
Yeah, sort of going back to your question, Peter, and reflecting on some of the other comments as well. I think 5.0 is different to employee-driven innovation and that sort of thing, and worker engagement and all that sort of discussion, because it's infused with I think the best term is an anxiety with kind of, you know, what it is that technology is doing to us and the workplace. And this is primarily acceleration and exploitation, of course, and fear of automation and job losses and all of this sort of thing. So it's certainly very similar to employee-driven innovation, but that's about acceleration. Whereas 5.0 is not about acceleration. It's about hold on a minute, we're already accelerating too quickly, to follow Hartmut Rosa's claims. Yeah. So I think it's different because it's infused. It's really similar, and it's about responsible management as well. But it's infused with this sort of techno anxiety as well. But I think it's also a problematic term. So it is a relabeling, but infused with something else. But I think it's become a problematic term because of this, because of the existence of 4.0, which it is, of course, a reaction to. It's not a phenomena in its own right. It's a reaction, and it does imply, as Sergio was saying, a kind of next phase, and I think that was a mistake actually in the labeling, because this is not a progression to a new industrial phase, I don't think. And this is very intimidating when you talk to firms who aren't even at 2.0 yet, right? So they say, well, what the hell, you know, are we so far behind? It's about the sort of diffusion of practices, I think, and I think both Stephen and I have said this. It's about practices and encouraging those practices. And the other key thing we found in our project, kind of backing this up, is what we've called strange mixed ecologies. You know, industry doesn't progress from one phase to another. It just collects new technologies and collects new practices, and all sorts of old machines and old skills get mixed up with new machines and new skills, and they in all sorts of strange and interesting ways. So there's not a sudden break with the past and a moving on. And I think we need to see Industry 5.0 in that crazy mixed up old and new context. So it's about context and practice. It's not about phases and transitions. That's my view. You know, others might disagree.
Yeah, no, very helpful, Chris. Thank you. Diane.
Thank you. I've listened to my colleague, Chris and Ziga, and what I noticed is that on one part, Ziga was talking about KPI and practices, and Chris said it's about context and practices. But what we have learned from SEISMEC is that actually the vision of Industry 5.0 is not clear. What we are missing, and what Chris said, is just a link, we are missing a practical tool that can link so the value we have from Industry 5.0 and the practices. And then my question to my colleague is, what kind of tool do you have for the industry to make this human centricity more tangible for the industry?
I think I'd really like to come back to that as well, because I think that bridging that gap between the fairly abstract concept and practice, I think, is something that we're getting experience on from these projects, but I think is not clear to much of the practitioner community. Brendan, what's your take on this?
Yeah, no, a little bit to kind of echo what Sergio had brought up and Chris kind of built on, and I think that's what we've seen, at least working with the companies that we have and the use cases, is that Industry 4.0, it's not this next, 5.0, it's not this next page in a chapter. This isn't this linear progression that just moves and keeps going and so on and so forth. That it's really about building this symbiosis, this symbiotic and this collaboration between human and machine. And a lot of times, as Chris pointed out, it's not just adopting new technology. You have old technology that has to interface with new technology, and you have to adapt essentially how workers are going to be having to interact with this fusion and this interoperability between data transformations is extremely difficult to communicate between the workforce and also managers who see this more as a confusion and a hindrance than anything else. So I think trying to better understand and communicate what this data transparency and this access to data really does for the workforce is something that's becoming extremely important.
And Siobhan.
Just touching on that a little bit on Brendan and Chris's points, I suppose SEISMEC, a part of the process is incorporating pilot and worker-led input into the design of the technology. So this is where we're finding links. So in some of the pilots, we have brand new technologies that are being developed to address specific needs that the workers have presented, but we're also developing or improving technologies that are already existing and already in place in the workplace. So I think this, the SEISMEC project is identifying ways in which we can engage with the workers to identify those potential issues or challenges with the bridging of, say, Industry 4.0 to Industry 5.0.
I mean, this is interesting because there are a lot of different approaches across the projects for engaging with businesses, but I'm not, maybe it's me, but I'm not seeing the kind of the common principles which are coming across from this, you know, because we still really lack a kind of a coherent narrative. So if I go into a company tomorrow and they ask me to explain Industry 5.0, I'm not sure that I have enough kind of you know, common principles, as it were, or core principles, to really explain what it looks like in practice for your organization in that sense. Are there cross-cutting themes which you think are emerging from this that will help that explanation? Stephen?
Yeah. I've been looking at ISO standards and all those kind of things, and if you look at them and what their spirit is about, and try to understand what they've tried to sell to companies as practices and principles, a lot of these things are really aligned with what Industry 5.0 wants. So it's strangely the development of these ISO standards and all these kind of things. I can't find an ISO standard that is saying you should not be Industry 5.0. It does not advocate practices which destroy voice of workers. There are no those standards. Most of the standards are about user engagement, or they're also about employee engagement in these technologies. So there is this common understanding visible in standards on how to work with everyone in the company to further companies. Let's say I would not go personally to a company saying, I'm going to sell you Industry 5.0. No, I'm going to help you improve your processes and your practices and your technologies. But understand, if you want to do that, you have to do that bottom up. You have to do that in a way where you engage people in ways that you engage with the anxieties that people have, and try to improve and define with the company what is needed to go forward. So in this sense, Industry 5.0 is not something that probably is going to be the leading thought at the company level. However, it is also a policy concept. So there, and that's something I think we need to make this distinction between what is needed to attract and to change industrial policies. And Industry 5.0 is an interesting concept in this respect. And when it was launched, the first discussions that there were about Industry 5.0, the statement was, it is not the next phase for Industry 4.0. It is something to help put Industry 4.0 in its right place. In the sense, as Sergio said, too few companies understand what is needed to get to Industry 4.0. The approach to Industry 4.0 was wrong from the beginning, and it should be redirected, and putting human centricity central in that respect was quite important. But that's at policy level. It's trying to understand that we need technologies, because technologies has what economists would say positive externalities. But human centricity also puts the element forward that good jobs also have positive externalities. So if we can create good jobs, then and this is connected to technologies, then we have the winning formula. And hopefully this is going to be European formula, because the US is leaving this part quite clearly. So that's what I would make this distinction between the policy level and what is needed for companies.
I think that's very, I mean, a very far-reaching conclusion in some ways, because, I think we've all sat through discussions in the community of practice and other places where there's been a sort of focus on selling the concept of Industry 5.0 to companies. But you're arguing, actually, no, we're just promoting a much more organic set of practices that really achieve those Industry 5.0.
We need companies to change. We need to give them a perspective on where they need to go to. So I'm really in favor of having KPIs and all those kind of things. But as I said at the beginning, it's hard to define. It's easy to recognize. It's difficult to put companies into boxes. A lot of big companies, they know what is needed. They have no problem. But a lot of SMEs, very startups and those kind of companies, they need guidance, they need support and this kind of thing. And if you want to create this kind of support, you need an industrial policy to do that. You need to have an understanding that you want to support good jobs. You want to support this change toward more human-centric approaches. And there, a lot of companies do not know what is needed. They need more information. They need more guidance. So, and if we call it Industry 5.0, that's fine. But I'm happy to hear the opinions of others.
If I may build on what Steven said, and thank you for actually making the link, Steven. Before you started, I actually wanted to point out that I think we're talking, we're talking about Industry 5.0 at, let's say, at least two different levels. You have an industry level and you have a policy maker level. And I think, as Steven said, the Industry 5.0, at least in Europe, I think the biggest push came from the European Commission. But the world was way different back then. So, today you overnight, let's say not really overnight, but let's put it this way, we woke up in a different world, which now see how it runs. And don't take me as a KPI guru. I am far away from it. No, not at all. I think, what we were doing and what all the projects were doing and was building awareness. And I think the awareness now is there. How do you then translate it into very practical tools? And I think Diane mentioned this, and I will react to that. We in Prospects, we build the assessment framework, or we are building it. So we have a set of KPIs. That's an Excel file right now, very concretely for the companies. In, I think, 6 to 8 months, it should be an online interface which actually, you know, helps you to enter the data and then benchmarks you against your peers in Europe. Now, again, you know, we could have the whole webinar just discussing about this because my sector is like this and your sector is different and I'm an SME and you're a big group, etc. Yes, we know all of this. We had discussions, long discussions, but we need to start somewhere and put it in very concrete tools. So that's what we're doing. I think also to react to what you said, Peter, cross-cutting teams, I think what we're seeing now is what Stephen also mentioned, industrial policies. We're now coming to a crossroad where we actually have done a lot of experimentations, we have tools, but now we have to talk, you know, see how policymakers want to take these tools up, and then how the industry will translate this and integrate it in their own every, you know, day-to-day business, because in the end they have to generate revenues. That's, you know, we cannot hide from that. So bringing the two worlds together and hoping that, you know, we then lead, and this will help with our competitiveness, but not only, you know, also with the resilience. I think Industry 5.0, if you look into it, you know, it's also cybersecurity approach. How do you manage that, etc., etc. It's not only human centricity, but it's all the resilient part that, you know, today is very much pertinent and way more pertinent than it was 5 years ago or a year ago. So I think these are the cross-cutting teams that are now coming onto the table, and it's also up to us and the people that are funding the projects, but also at the regional level, you know, the policymakers at the regional level, because European Commission is one thing, and then you have regions that basically have a lot of influence there. So I think we see at Prospects how this is one of the cross-cutting teams, and I think Simona might react to that because she's dealing with actually with the community that we have. We're trying to, you know, bring people from the industry together and behind one table, and then the policymakers and the facilitators, as we call it, which is all of us, university RTOs, and I think we have a set of challenges there as well.
Simona.
Yeah, as Giga said, we have a set of challenges. We also confirmed these challenges from the use cases, because since we are trying to be concrete as much as possible, so we need to provide solutions to the sector, not only to the companies, but also to the political ecosystem and to the business organizations who can support the companies into this process. Yeah, and also to answer you, Peter, well, on one side, the concept of Industry 5.0 is not interpreted as it is, because the companies are already in the flow of this reframing process of their industrial transformation, because on one side they need to apply environmental approaches on one side. On the other side, they need to keep social well-being, and they need to manage all this transformation and reframe their approach with resiliency. So that's why, but they do not use the name Industry 5.0. They are just managing the change. They are calling probably this Industry 5.0 a big challenge they need to face with, because of course they were pushed by the regulatory compliance. If we talk about environmental impact, so their changes are motivated by the regulatory requirements at European or at national level. Starting from what we collected from our use cases, for example, during one of the workshops, so their main challenge was about the integration of the new technologies into their current technologies and processes. So this is in terms of, you know, technology competencies, technology matching, technology compliance, and also taking into consideration what are the cybersecurity tools to be adopted to ensure that everything is safe. On the other side, there is the need to develop the change and to drive the technology transformation with the workforce. So some of the projects who are here, they are focused on the upskilling of the workforce. This is another issue that's raised from our companies during this workshop. And of course, there are the financial constraints because there is an initial investment in this changing process. But at the base of this transformation, the big factor is that there is a cultural resistance. So if we talk about Industry 5.0 as a brand, so we have the big challenge not only to pass the word and to make people aware that is a good transformation that can have good impact in terms of competitiveness, impact on the environment, and so on, and on the well-being. But it's also a kind of change of mindset of people who were used to work in such a way so far, and they are trying the way to change their way to work. And each project is probably providing specific tools. Prospects is working on this assessment framework that is an initial tool because you can use it at the beginning in order to understand how are you positioned compared to the market standards and how are you positioned based on your specific market sector, so industry size, industry sector, and so on. But we are also providing, for example, Wiki 5.0, that is a repository, of the updated knowledge about the field. I think that this is a work in progress. So we are reframing also our approach in order to invite and engage people into this project. We already created a community of interest in which we involved people from different ecosystems. So we have business support organizations, we have the Digital Innovation Hub, we have the policymakers, and so on and so on. So this means that also, thanks to our projects, we can stress the awareness of all these actors, so we can act from and touch different sides of this chain. So we can act in terms of policy because we can cooperate and co-design with them, which are the main actions and which are the regulatory solutions they could adopt, starting from the needs of the companies. We can work with business organizations in order to find the best way to facilitate the transformation. And we can cooperate and co-design with the companies in order to provide tools that are really fitting with their needs.
I think that's very interesting, but I think you also highlighted a kind of a tension there because you talked about compliance, which is a word which I always find very depressing because compliance often means just ticking boxes in a way that involves minimal kind of real change. And I think that, there's a difference between compliance and really embracing, if you like, the vision and values that Industry 5.0 addresses. And, I'd like to explore that a little bit more, really. But, Sergio, what?
Yes, first of all, I wanted to agree with what Simona said, and so that Industry 5.0 could be the real way to transform regulatory compliance into a competitive advantage. And this is the key point for European manufacturing industry. Another key challenge in European manufacturing industry is the generational challenge. And the digitalization Industry 4.0 has deepened the gap between generation and the digital divide. The digital divide in our companies are now really a problem. And we have the most experienced people aging, which do not have enough digital literacy, On the other side, you have the young generation, the digital generation, which do not see manufacturing workplaces as attractive as other workplaces. And this is a point that we really need to address, that there is this gap. And all the companies I met, they struggle to find adequate workforce, and they tend to retain the older workers at work, even if maybe they are not so digital literate. So one of the major errors, in my opinion, in Industry 4.0 was the extreme push of technology without taking into account other factors, more human SSH factors. And so this push has really created this gap. A second point is multicultural. And so our factories are now multicultural, and we have people with very, very different skills, very different background. And so in this perspective, also the inclusion of those people into the factory needs to be improved. AI, generative AI, chat box, and all this stuff could really be helpful in that. And so this could be a revenge of digital technologies, which maybe create some difficulties, but then they could recover.
Diane.
Thank you, Peter. My colleague, if I can go back to what Steven said about Industry 5.0, he said that one of the objectives as a family, by investing in human centricity, it was to improve the quality of jobs. And why? And Sergio gave one of the answers, because we are losing some skills. Maybe it's a way to keep these people with offering them the good quality jobs. But two words attract my attention. One was from SIGA. He said that he was talking about generate revenues, and Simona said about the financial constraints. And I come back to that because it's a good idea to say that it's good for company to invest in human centricity, but we are talking about company. They have to survive. It's about investment. And the question is that we should be able to measure that. If I invest into human centricity, what it means in terms of the logical calculation of that. And it's something we will try to do in this study within SEISMEC. We have conducted several interviews, and we will have the results shortly to see why that means financially investing in human centricity.
I'm curious about this because I think it's a discussion I've been involved in several times in my working life. But do you see that move towards human centricity as being simply a kind of like an accountancy calculation, in the sense that, we get more productive, we get less turnover if we do this? Or is it something which is much more deeply embedded in values? Because I don't know any companies who have really gone through that, that sort of spreadsheet calculation. It's very often because it really is embedded at a high level in the way that the company is, how it wants to be, how it's led.
Go
ahead, Steven.
Any big company will always calculate. And I know at the beginning of the community of practice, Schneider Electric was present there, and they said any investment that they made into these things, they earn back in less than a year. So it was a no-brainer for them to invest into Industry 5.0. But they said this calculation is very complicated for SMEs and for their suppliers, for smaller companies, because they don't have the information, and Schneider does not see that as their main task of informing companies and they're delivering their services. That they're not a training company, so they want these kind of services supplied by governmental agencies. But big companies and also small companies need this bottom line reasoning of how human centricity delivers towards competitiveness.
And if I just may jump in, because one of our use cases actually, they are working on protective wear, so the shoes, and what they said, sometimes actually the principles of the Industry 5.0 are, you know, in conflict with themselves or what we're trying to achieve, because he said, you know, we actually would like to have our production more sustainable, but at the same time, because we are working on protective wear, the shoes, you know, we have some standards to respect that actually prevent us from having our production more sustainable. So, you know, sometimes it's very practical challenges and something that was maybe not taken into account that, you know, impacts this. So it's not just Excel formulas, obviously not. And as Steven said, you know, big companies calculate it. I think small companies, they have to make choices. They know that, you know, even if the Excel says that would be the right thing and it would, you know, maybe generate more revenues. By the way, Diane, we are on the same page here, right? One is practice, and I mean, one thing is the theory, the other one is practice. Yeah, but they have to make choices, which big companies sometimes can have a bigger backlog of money and can do. And yeah, just wanted to jump in here. And I think we have an external guest that maybe wants to jump in quickly here. I see Frank. I don't know, Peter.
Siobhan and Chris, I'll come back to you in a moment, but let's get a quick question from Frank. That's
it's not a question for me. It's always risky to put your hand up when when you're fifth in line, because the discussion will go another way.
But, you have an echo, Frank. It's hard to hear you.
Okay, I'm not sure how that happens. Is it better if I speak not too loud? Okay, yeah. So I'm a colleague of Stephen and Diane, and I work for Bridges and SEISMEC, but I'm also part of the human factors and ergonomics community for over 30 years. And just focusing on Industry 5, on the human centricity part, I heard a couple of times we need tools. And I think it's not about creating tools, because I think there are loads and loads of tools available from the human factors and ergonomics community, from sociotechnics, from design thinking. It's all about human centricity, and we're going all towards the same direction. Humanistic engineering also going in the same direction. So in my view, it's about getting industry to believe that a human-centric approach will get them further. And cost benefit analysis is one thing. I mean, that's the Ernst Koningsveld, Frank Pot knows him. He started this discussion about making cost benefit analyses of interventions, because that's what a company is about. But when you start designing new work, it's about believing that whatever scientific evidence there is will help them, will get them further. It's still about believing, and the question is then, how do we get them to believe this? Because that's what I mean, the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, but also Sociotechnics, what we've been trying to get them to believe for over 30, 60 years.
Good point, Frank.
And what you say, it is about values.
Yeah. And we could have a whole discussion, I think, about leadership values and how that shapes things. So
could I follow on from that? I think,
if you don't mind, Siobhan. Yeah, come on, Chris.
Sorry, real quick. Yeah, I think we can definitely broaden the discussion to education. I mean, we know that, for example, students with MBAs, they tend to extract about 15 to 20% more work out of their workers, adding to the acceleration. I don't mean that as a positive. So the sort of education that managers are getting at the minute is just shareholder values, basically, how to increase that. Can we turn some of this stuff that we've got and stuff from the past, like employee-driven innovation, into better education? Should we be thinking about how this translates into that? Because I agree, a lot of it is about values, but and we found this in our project as well, but those values are picked up somewhere quite often, particularly in the big firms.
Bring Siobhan in here because you've been very, very patient and I haven't been.
Sorry, apologies.
No problem at all. I think my comments are sort of connected to a lot of what everyone has said so far. So I think it's quite useful to be towards the end of the discussion points on this one. So I suppose early in the question around the cross-cutting themes, the focus was on industry and policy. And then a few other colleagues like Simona and Sergio mentioned the workforce and all of that. So I suppose for me, in terms of the work with SEISMEC, I find that it's really important that we're empowering workers to buy into wanting to adopt these technologies. So it's not necessarily about, I suppose, process and policy for me, but as Frank said, sort of values. And how do we communicate that with the workers? And what SEISMEC are looking to explore are, I suppose, cross-cutting themes or transversal themes that as we phrase them, in terms of what needs to be protected and enabled within the technology development itself, but also within the perceptions of the workers. So these are things like trust and fairness and safety with the technology, things like inclusion and how those technologies are developed and whether workers feel that those technologies will do what they should do for them and their various backgrounds, and also learning and skills development, as well as Chris was mentioning, ensuring that that is embedded in a way that is useful for the workers and isn't a burden and isn't kind of, increasing their workload and things like that. And then also the sort of cybersecurity and ethics piece that was touched on as well by other speakers earlier. So I think it's trying to create those or support those developments within the technology, but also supporting the perceptions of those with the workers and helping them to be empowered to actually adopt the technology in their workplace and everyday work.
I've seen research that, Chris mentioned employee-driven innovation, and I'm sure there's research which actually shows that where employees are routinely involved in improvement and innovation activities, where there is that kind of culture, then they are more receptive to technological innovation in that sense. And in the case of companies like Kirchhoff Automotive in Letterkenny that we did a case study of, a lot of the ideas for automation have actually come from the shop floor. And there are other examples as well. So I think this is something that we really need to focus more on collectively.
Can I keep my slot?
Yeah. Sorry.
Very, very short comment then. Just to follow on from what you're both saying there. One of the things we found in one of our cases was not just involving the workers in the technology and the technology choices, but actually involving them in the development of the training for that as well. As we engaged with the firm, they were kind of struggling to get the training across to workers, and of course we were talking to the workers because we were on the shop floor, and then we got them involved in actually designing the training, and that completely changed the whole kind of interaction around the technology and the acceptance of the technology. And it's an international firm, and they're actually going to roll this process out globally. So it's had a real impact. So not just human centricity around technology, but also in the processes of the firm, including training, seems to make a huge difference. I really liked Simona's term that she used earlier, with the workforce. It's such a nice term because it implies a firm, a managerial approach which is just with the workers. They don't see themselves as distinct, perhaps. And so I'm kind of thinking, terms like human centricity is very precise and quite often implies, human-centric technology. But these broader terms, and we've come across one as well, which is taking our people with us. So it's a much broader take on involving the workers and how you think about the workers. And I just wonder if we can think and talk in terms of that. I hope that made sense. It's the broadness of it, the philosophy of it, rather than a specific technique like human-centric. It makes more sense perhaps to people.
Yeah, and I think old-fashioned words like empowerment are are useful in this context as well, because
Yeah.
I think I get anxious sometimes when I hear people talking about the need to change the mindset of workers, which sounds like a very kind of
have a mindset problem. Yes. Yeah,
But,
because you've been screwing them for decades. Yeah.
I just wanted to emphasize two things that Chris said about the mindset of students and how they're educated. So one of our learning factories, as we call them in our project, was with students and talking and learning about sustainability and those kind of things. And at the start with these students, they had no clue why they should be thinking and working on this kind of subject. These were students in the logistics domain, and at the end of the program, we evaluated that again with students, and they said that they now had a better perception of why this is important and why they should take this with them when they go into their new jobs and those kind of things. So education and bringing new values to education is crucial. I think, and it's going to be an important point for Industry 5.0 to find that entrance into the education system. And the second point I wanted to emphasize is what you have experienced, Chris, is what we also saw where Roland was pointing out the company that we visited last week. They wanted to do an organizational change, and they had this where they abolished a lot of jobs and they centralized into a kind of cockpit, and they want to retrain the workers to come into this new office. And the workers said, but we don't have the skills for this. We don't know what we're going to be doing in this office. So they created the training with them to be able to work in this new environment. So that's what we had in our project as a teaching factory, as called, problem driven, and the training created in collaboration with the workers. So, and this has helped this company extremely well, because they're going to sell this part to all their other subparts in the organization within one location, but this is a global company, so they're going to do this in a lot of ways. Yeah, Giga.
Yes. So I would just like to come back to two elements which actually link to what Steven said and before, and what Chris said. So one is generational gap. I think that is largely underestimated, and we now see HR departments dealing with this as they can. And so I think, you know, what we're doing in the project definitely helps them. And the second one, I confirm the fact that you include your workforce in the transformational process, whatever this transformational process is, from the beginning, all of the use cases, you know, said it basically brought only positive results. Of course, it's more work. It's, you know, it's bottom up to some extent. It's easier to do it top down. The management says, and you do it because you're paid to do. But I just confirm what was said. We see it, you know. Of course, let's say, the experimentation was mostly on KPIs, but they had to get the data from the workers themselves. And, you know, you have plenty of service. We all deal with this, and you have this survey fatigue, etc. But if you present it in a larger framework and you explain why and what you're trying to achieve and what this will bring to them, you know, that has such a positive effect.
Yeah. Just to add to that, so we had up to 6 teaching factories, and each of these, there's no general line within these teaching factories, except for the fact that the employees need to be engaged into doing that. But it's suited to a lot of problems and a lot of issues that companies want to solve. And so there are several dimensions, because companies need to have more technologies, new technologies, then need to be able to work with that. But these technologies, and learning with that can be done in the school system. That's what we did with the learning factories. But applying them and working within the organization always generates issues and problems. And the way to deal with that is not to force workers to do that, but to give them the experimentation time to see what is needed, to define training programs on that, and create an environment in which everyone wants to learn. And anyway, those are the experiments that we can share our information about.
I think it's very important, Stephen. Thank you. Roland.
Echoing on what Sergio has said about the values and how to interlink Industry 4.0 and 5.0, and also what Stephen has said on the meter level, on the policy level, we would like to generate good jobs, and we are the ones to transfer that to also the level of the companies. And when thinking about why we would need good jobs, and now looking at it from a company perspective, there are several arguments for that, and I would just try to highlight a few of these. One is, for instance, we see that these companies that go for good jobs, they tend to attract more highly qualified people. So it has an added value for them if they do so, no matter whether it's generation Z or Y or X or so. Another one is they find it easier to create a creative and innovative culture, and that means they might come up with a competitive advantage because good ideas are valued. Another one is we see that quite a lot of companies, they're in a permanent transformation, of course. And if they come up with these good jobs, in many cases, they find a higher or better acceptance among their workforce for going for this transformation. And of course, we see that they might take better use of the equipment. Maybe they might have less maintenance. So these are all cost elements. And of course, it's extremely important, as was Chris, you have said, the training and the focused training is extremely important for the existing workforce. And so these are all arguments, and there are many others for why we do need to create good jobs. And if we go to companies, this would be some of the arguments I use in convincing them that why it's important to do that.
I think this relates to a point that Frank's made on in the chat about the risk of speaking about human-centric technology. He says it's a bit like speaking about an ergonomic mouse. I'm not quite sure I understand. but I mean, we shouldn't be talking about technology on its own, but talking about technology in that sort of, yeah, okay. But
that's an ergonomic mouse. You didn't get the argument, Peter.
But I do get the argument about thinking about technology and the type of organization that it creates. And I wonder, because we often talk about technology as such an abstract or high level concept, we don't think about how it can be used to create human-centric workplaces, how it can be used to create flatter organizations, more self-managed teams, for example, all of which we know are strongly associated with high quality, healthy jobs. So I just wonder what the projects are showing about these types of technologies that actually relate to creating more positive organizational structure.
I could talk about one example of a sort of a production management system, and what they did in this firm, this kind of medium-sized firm, is bring in a production management system with all the orders and all that sort of thing, and what needed to be done when. They then made that available to the workforce, and the idea was that the workforce would look at this board in the morning and they would see where they were most needed, and they would self-organize, is the idea, and go there. It didn't really work, or it isn't working, for a couple of reasons. Ironically, and maybe against our values, not all workers want to self-organize. They want supervisors, and they might even want close contact with their managers, and that was being cut off from them. And that was the idea of this system, was to take out a layer of management and kind of digitalize it, basically. That's what's happening. So this kind of apparent engagement, self-organizing, flexibility, was not welcomed. The other thing that it did was many of the workers in this plant are very highly skilled, and they would just want to get on and do their jobs, organizing themselves or
The connection is wobbly, Chris.
Is my connection wobbly? Yeah, you how's it? What's it like now?
Yeah, can hear you.
So it's about two elements. Do workers always want to be engaged? That's question number one. And the second question is, when you make workers more flexible, and this is a trend, so the digitalization of management is one trend. The other trend is to make workers more flexible and make the firm more adaptable. Workers can move between stations, etc., etc. But there's a risk there, both to workers being disgruntled because they don't want to be moved around, and secondly, these are very skilled guys mainly who work with their hands, with often very complex machinery, and they can lose those skills. Those skills can be diluted. So there's a kind of there's hidden dangers in this, so we shouldn't get too excited about the idea of worker engagement and self-organization and flexibility and things like that, because they have costs and downsides as well, which might not become apparent for years potentially. So just want to throw that negativity into the mix.
Just for the sake of an argument, can I challenge that negativity a little bit, Chris? Because I mean, we've often heard from managers often tell us, well, our people just want to come to work to be told what to do and go home at the end of a shift. And the only conceivable response to that is, what have you done to make them like that? Because people are naturally, I think, inventive. They want control over their own lives. And I think if you take that same group of workers away with a flip chart and you say, what really frustrates you about your work, I can guarantee you almost that 9 out of 10 of the things that frustrate them will be about incompetent management, micromanagement, boss not understanding how things are on the shop floor, all of those different things. And you then get that same group of workers to turn it round into what would it look like if it was good. And they'll say, trust us to do our jobs. And you can work through that kind of process with them, but it is a cultural shift. And I think it also ties in very much with what Stephen was saying about training, allowing them to co-design the training so they learn not just the technical skills, but also the teamwork skills in that, the problem-solving skills.
I just thought I'll push back on you slightly. Our kind of experience in the project is that there are maybe more workers than we think who want to be at their workstation, be extremely good, be the guy who can drill 200 holes, a sub-millimeter without snapping the drill bit, not destroy that bit of metal. That's what they do. They don't want to be micromanaged, and they don't need to be micromanaged. They want to be left alone. In one of the firms, Swedish firm, actually, I mean, it's Sweden, so maybe it doesn't count. The workers would go to the lunchroom and from the different cells that they worked in, and they go to the lunchroom, and they'd sit separately and they wouldn't talk to each other, and then they'd get up and go back to their cells. Maybe that's also good work, being left alone to be really good at this job. Maybe that's also good work, even if it's mundane, even if it's boring. We've also found some people like boring work, actually, repetitive, mundane work. Their excitement is outside of the workplace. They just want to come in and switch off their brains. So we shouldn't, I worry sometimes, do we impose our kind of, higher educated, middle class sensibilities onto some workers sometimes, I've been arguing that some guys want to climb down into drains and clean them out, or risk their lives on the side of buildings. Who are we to say?
Well, let me push back on that, because I've done interviews 30 years ago with people in textile companies, and we had redesigned workplaces with group work and those kind of things. And we had this lady that was sitting, and she was really, really extremely performant in what she did. She could outperform everyone by nearly two times. And so she was not interested in the new design and the new workplaces because she was twice as performant. And being twice as performant as the others, she could do the work blind. So she could actually talk the whole time and doing this job. So why would she want to change? Because the world has changed and the environment has changed. So there is no demand for something that is produced 2,000 times a day. There is no demand for that. So you can't stay in those kinds of positions. So your environment is continuously going to change. So as managers, you really need to understand what is needed for change management. Industry 5.0 is about these kind of things. The only person who's happy with change is a baby in a wet diaper. So that's the reality. All the others, even me, I don't like it when there's new management coming in and they go in a different direction. So it's always complicated, those kind of situations. But we have to understand that organizations that are here today are probably not going to be there tomorrow. So we need to see what is needed to go with the flow and try to understand how to get there. And one other thing that I also want to add, but this is opening another can of worms. Of course, people are not interested in change processes if they're not engaged into what these change processes are going to deliver to the company and deliver to themselves. So what is the added value that is created by changes and by the organization? And can I have a say on what is coming to me in that? And that coming to me can be in training, can be in real cash, can be in other kinds of things. But you need to understand that you are allowed to have this kind of discussion within an organization. And Industry 5.0 with the concept of voice should connect to that kind of element.
Brilliant.
I think following your question, Peter, and I would like to echo what Chris has already said. In interviews, we saw that there are some employees, they are very enthusiastic, would like to take over responsibility, and then suddenly they get children and they have a completely different scope. So they would like to have a secure job, and they would like to do that, do their work, and then go home and do other things. So it's not always the management, but it's individual decisions of people, and of course you have to take these into account as well. Of course, there's sometimes you have to think about could the top management change something, but in there are quite a lot of cases, and I also had them in interviews where the motivation was just shifted or transferred in a way.
I think, I mean, what are we really talking about here? Because it's not about telling everybody they have to be in a continuous improvement group or innovation forum every day, but simply, as Stephen says, they have a voice so that things can change. That, if you like, the tacit knowledge that they gain from their day-to-day work can help to shape and reshape the organization as it develops, in a sense. But I don't know. There's a balance to be struck, I think, in some cases, and certainly, yeah. I mean, we've seen in some companies that people, some sorts of personality types are very, very happy just doing one thing continuously, but others in the same organization need something and can contribute something more broadly. Anyway, perhaps we should just think about one or two other things. I mean, I'd like to come back to thinking about the three pillars of Industry 5.0, because I've been very skeptical about whether three pillars are the right kind of sort of metaphor for this, because to what extent are these three pillars three separate silos, which can easily just become three simple sets of tick box exercises? And to what extent is human centricity really at the heart of this? Because without human centricity, are you really going to achieve sustainability goals? Are you really going to achieve resilience in that sense? What is the interconnection between the pillars?
If I may, Peter, going back to the discussion that we had before, I think it's very similar. You know, you don't need to empower all the people actually within the company. You just want to put the framework there so it exists, so it's not top down. And here, you know, obviously some of the companies will look at the three pillars, and some might just take human centricity or resilience. Now, I would argue that, you know, again, human centricity is central to all of it, because you still have people working in the companies, you know, on the shop floor and so on. So that, and I think this will not change so soon, although, you know, Elon and colleagues are promising robots in the next 5 years. But yes, my colleagues in the robotics department say differently. So I think, you know, you have a set of, obviously they can be separate silos, and that might happen, and that will probably happen. But, you know, you give people tools, you give them a vision, and then they use it, you know, depending on their situation, the size of the company, again, the means available, etc. But again, I think sustainability, whatever you do there, and whatever you do in resilience, if you look just very concretely, a concrete example, you know, part of resilience, we mentioned it, it's cybersecurity, and it's all the infrastructure that goes with it. The weakest link there is human again. So, you know, I think human for the time being, and probably a couple of years still, is the central part. Chris has his hands up. Yes, who are you?
I couldn't hear Peter. Peter was calling me. But yeah, I'll jump in. Let's talk about unions and power. I think there's good examples, not necessarily from our case study, but case studies where workers are powerful because they are very highly skilled and in demand, or because they're unionized. They can be quite good at saying no to things. I mean, the classic example being can't remember which big tech company it was, but their workers refused to work on military projects, for example. So they were kind of making an informed choice. Maybe it was Microsoft, I can't remember. And I'm thinking that, you know, the unions have been a really strong voice around, you know, gender equality, for example. So they can be a really strong voice around sustainability issues and resilience issues as well. You know, why are we putting the firm at risk? Because they have an interest in protecting the firm, because it's where their workers are employed, for example. So having a collective voice in that way, I think, is something we should encourage, because they can force change.
We've just completed a project called Broad Voice, one of the social dialogue EU-funded projects, and that showed very strongly big difference in union approaches to human centricity in different countries, where some, you know, particularly in the Sweden, Denmark example, you know, for example, is very much embedded in a lot of the kind of the day-to-day negotiation that goes on between unions and management. Whereas in other countries, it's virtually unknown in that sense, and it's not understood. And there's a real lesson, I think, about unions needing to become more like knowledgeable participants in the transition.
Yeah. Just on that note, Peter, actually, I'm doing some work in banking, AI in banking as well, and we've been working with banking unions in Sweden, and we've been really amazed by their lack of knowledge about the potential negative implications of AI in the workplace, even though the research is sitting there, you know. And I think in some ways, as academics, we've fallen down on the job in not making this sort of more broadly known, that case studies that we have of, you know, acceleration and exploitation, what have you, surveillance. So they weren't a strong voice at all around how they should deal with AI. You know, they simply focused on training and preserving jobs, but they didn't take that bigger picture view. you know, how's the organization going to transform as a consequence, and how's that going to affect the experience of work? So education with the unions as well. Yeah, totally direct experience of this. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Maybe for trade unions at European level, they're working on the program called Just Transition. So they're supportive of all these transition projects, but they want it to be just. And so they have this discussion on all kinds of topics. So that's something that is that we should keep in mind. So the trade unions are aware of these discussions, but they say we can't support as long as this is seen as just. I was a bit surprised by the effort to disconnect human centricity from sustainability and resilience. Let's say it's as I said, Industry 5.0 is a policy and has an intention to connect these things because they are disconnected in companies. Let's say companies are a lot of companies have not shown sufficient attention to negative externalities as environment and those kind of things. That there's still a lot of issues that we know that policies to deal with that do have effect, even in the US. We know that 50% of energy in Texas comes from solar and not from coal or something like that. So policies do have an effect on what companies do. So it is important to point out to companies that they have to deal with negative externalities, and the fact that you connect this to human centricity. Let's say from the policy perspective, there was this idea that we need these three elements at the same time. But they've asked us as research communities to think about that and how this is connected. So a policymaker will probably not be able to answer your question, Peter, but we as researchers, we as practitioners in this field can indicate how important this is and how these three should be aligned. Yeah.
I'd like to open this up to there's another 30 participants in the webinar apart from the panel. I'd like to open it up to anybody else who's got any questions. So please just raise your hand if there's anything you want to raise. Meanwhile, I think would anybody in the panel like to draw some sort of overall conclusions from everything we've been discussing over the last hour and 40 minutes?
Of course, but I think I've spoken enough. But let's say the first thing for me, from my perspective, is that I extremely appreciate the fact that we have this talking engagement, but also working in several activities between the projects, mainly to put this topic, this complicated topic, on the agenda. And also discussing with the community of practice of Industry 5.0 what is needed for companies to do these things. What we also need to understand is that the support in the projects and all those are on the screen seems a lot, but is still, if you consider the number of companies, the number of the challenges that we have, is still the support from public policy is too limited. It's really it does not yet give the big change that is needed for industry. So we are doing with all the projects the best that we can, but we need a more clear direction from policymakers at the European, at the national, and at the regional level. To make the changeover that is needed for European industries. We all say that these values are important. Well, let us see from policy side how they want to support that. The problem that I see is that there's a lack of idea on what next. So I think we're going to have this discussion in the coming months, and I think that the insights from the different participants here is crucial for this new phase.
Yes, I would. That's a perfect conclusion, I think, and summary. But I would just add, I see that, Karel Hagemann is not here from the Joint Research Center in Sevilla, unfortunately, but
he just left.
Yeah, I think he left 42 minutes ago at 12.
Yeah.
But anyway, I subscribe and sign under what Steven said, and just concretely, I think one very concrete next step would be to have these discussions within the community of practice from the Commission, and not have, these parallel activities that are due to, let's say, administrative procedures, from what I understood. So very concretely speaking, I think that will have then, again, I'm not naive, we're not going to reach 50,000 companies because of that, but already speaking with one voice, the Commission's community, and that's what we do projects here, I think that would be a step forward.
Can I ask what good would look like? I mean, if the Commission was really giving us what we want, what would it be? Because I think unless we're clear about how policymakers should be shaping this, then maybe it will just drift.
Yeah, but maybe Diane has first her hand.
Oh, thank you, Steven. I think you asked what was next, and what next. I think that's all what you have learned from the different studies should help organization to make better decision on Monday morning. It is what I hope at the end of all this project.
Could you just elaborate that a little bit more, Dan? I don't think we.
What I mean here is that it should not stay abstract of the organization. At the end, we should give them some directions, some things concrete to be able to invest in human centricity, to be able to give them good jobs, and also to have some direction from the high institution to help these organizations.
Peter, we can't hear you.
Can't hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay, sorry, I'm not sure why this is happening. So Diane, are you arguing for a kind of a roadmap for companies, that maybe something that maybe reflects the overall findings from all of these different projects?
Yes.
That would be an interesting development, I think, for us all to come together to pull something together like this. What do you think of the possibilities of that?
We're already doing that in the community of practice.
Yeah.
Oh, one of the activities is focused on doing that.
I mean, from what I understood, very bluntly put, the Commission, when we started Prospects, I don't know if it was a coincidence or not, but we had a community of practice foreseen in the proposal, and then the community of practice from the Commission, was established. We had an assessment framework that we needed to develop, and then there was some kind of an assessment tool that was developed within the community of practice from the Commission. So, a lot of, let's say, double efforts were put into this. So very, again, directly put, if you have 4 projects running, just outsource this management of the community to the projects, have them, establish a platform, because now you have your platform, Peter, we have, the wiki of Prospects, probably there are others. There is the Futurium or whatever it's called from the Commission, very concretely put, again, outsource this to the projects. The unit that is in charge can supervise it. Of course, you validate everything with them, but You know, why are you doubling the efforts? I don't understand. So that's very concretely the way forward. What Diane is saying, I think that comes later on. It's very difficult to actually, you have other tools at the Commission. You have EDIH that deal with hundreds of thousands of companies throughout the Europe, so you can actually then streamline the tools and embed them in their offer and so on. But that's a different DG. That's, you know, community of practice was DG RTD or still is. Then you have DG Connect that you need to link to this, etc., etc. So very concretely, the ideas were on the table already, but then you also have to have the same people managing the topic, and there were some, you know, there was human resource turnover on the Commission side, which didn't help, and so on. And then you also, let's be honest, you know, times have changed. When the community of practice started, it started in another era, and that was maybe just 2-3 years ago in this form. You know, you've seen Green Deal is off the table. I mean, or it's not being talked about. Now it's all defense. So these are the elements that we have to live with, but still, yes, concrete steps, first small ones, you know, they are on the table. It's now I would say that the ball is in the Commission side, or whoever is now managing this, if it's JRC in Sevilla. The discussions will be had, but
yeah. But there is a tendency to overstress the changes there are at the EU level. Of course, the Green Deal as it was is not on the table today, but sustainability is still top issue, because sustainability and the problems with our climate will not go away. We had 300 hours more sun in the Netherlands last year than ever, because we have cleaner air. That's our problem. We don't understand it, but at the same time, each year there's a 0.2 degrees rise in average temperature in the Netherlands. We know that we're going to have, we're already fighting a lot of problems with water coming from the sea under our dikes, and this will only become worse. We need companies to change their practices. We need sustainability to be there. The European Commission has limited scope because there has been a concerted action from employers and from this unholy collaboration within the European Parliament to reduce this. But it is not on the table. It's not like in the US. It means that we need to keep on working on these kind of topics. We need to change behavior within the companies, and we need to do that fast. So even if there's less attention, it will come back tomorrow, and because probably we'll see some enormous flooding, or we see an industrial accident taking place. The policy agenda is flexible. And we need to develop good approaches, good ideas, which can be scaled up at a certain moment. So I think the work of Prospects 5.0, of upskill, of skillability, all these projects and all this knowledge is crucial for the upscaling activities, which the European Commission is now asking us to deliver. So I think we're still very relevant for what's happening here.
Yeah. I mean, Cesar asked an interesting question about whether if the European Commission abandoned or walked away from the concept of Industry 5.0, would it disappear, or will it continue as a, if you like, a broader social movement almost? What I'd like to say is in relation to our platform, because I think Giga, very appropriately raised the question of duplication. We see this, and we're working on the sustainability of the platform well beyond the Life of the Bridges project. So many projects, the Beyond project, for example, produces absolutely brilliant outcomes, which then, disappear when the website disappears. a year or two after the end of the project. If we can create the Fresh Thinking Labs, or as we're rebranding it as the Industry 5.0 platform, as both the repository for all of these different projects, providing a kind of a long-term resource for them, but at the same time also actively creating synergies between the different findings, so it becomes a kind of a permanent and evolving site, actually owned by all the different stakeholders. That's something that we are working on, but we'd very much appreciate your thoughts on how to make that happen. We want to give up ownership of it, or to share ownership of it with you, so that independently of the Commission, or with their support maybe, we can create something which is beyond the sum of the parts and beyond the life of an individual project. And I think that's a vision that I hope that you can share with us.
Definitely. So if I will need to leave, because actually I have another meeting at 1, but I would just quickly react to Cesar's question, on the support of the industry, support of the European Commission to the Industry 5.0 paradigm. No, I don't think it would change, if the Commission stops supporting it. For all the reasons that Stephen actually mentioned, and because you actually have the regional level. So I think, I mentioned this during our discussion, you actually have different levels. Yes, we started at the European level because the Commission pushed this, and there were different reasons, but you also have the regional level, where regions are working on this for one or the other reason. And it's not going anywhere, because they are there, they have their ecosystems to work with, they see how they are impacted by the climate change, by the changing world order, the issues, the tariffs, etc. So it's there to stay. It might change a little bit as a policy framework, but it's there to stay definitely. It's up to us how do we link it, the European and regional level. So you have the resources, especially financial resources. I think that was also mentioned by colleagues, to support the companies. And I think then you come to what Diane is asking, to have some kind of blueprint, which obviously is a very ambitious plan, but it's good to have an ambitious plan, but then you also have to have sound basis.
Thank you. We've got just a few minutes left. I'd just like to ask the panel for any last words, any cross-cutting conclusions from this very interesting discussion we've had over the past couple of hours, and then we'll close. Anybody like a last word? No? Okay. Well, it's been a long 2 hours, but a very, very interesting one, a very stimulating one. I think we have established at least a direction for collaboration between all our different projects. And I hope we will continue this discussion in different forms. I know that various events are planned in the coming months, which will bring the different projects together. And I think we need to really, over the next year or so, really consolidate these things. But please consider our offer to share ownership of our platform with you. And I'd be very interested in using maybe some of the forthcoming events as an opportunity to shape that up in a bit more detail. But also, I'm very happy to have individual conversations with anybody who is interested in taking this forward. So thank you very much. I'd really like to thank our panel. Been absolutely brilliant. Brought in a lot of different perspectives, but actually with a lot of common ground as well. And I think this has been really helpful. The recording of this event will go on on our website and on the Fresh Thinking Labs platform over the next week or so, in the next few days. But also, I will be wading through the transcript and editing it fairly severely, but to try and again share the conclusions in a different way. and I will send it to all the panel members for their approval before it's published anyway. But thank you, everyone. Thank you to our audience, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thanks,
Bye.
Peter.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.